CodeIt now. Write a code segment that will output the letter grade depending on the score on the test given the scheme below. So the scheme below for grading is a pretty common one that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And before we write the actual code, let's just think about the general structure of the code we want. So since this is just a continuous grading scheme where we switch from one range of numbers to the range of number that follows to the next range of numbers, it makes sense to use an if, else if, else if, else if, else. And the last one is an else because if it's not any of these, then it should be the last one. Because generally we're going to assume that grades are in the range of 0 to 100. So we're not going to assume that we're ever going to receive some sort of score that's greater than 100. Because otherwise we would have to account for that with some other if or else if type of statement. All right, so now we can move over to our JGrasp window. And here I have compare XY open, and I'm just going to copy the code for this since it doesn't have a scanner object and we don't really need a scanner object, so there's no point of copying a file that has the scanner import statement. So we're going to do Control-C, Control-N for a new file, hit enter to select Java, Control-V to paste the file. Now we're going to change the name of this file, and it's no longer going to be called compare XY. Instead, we could just call it something like GradeOutput, since we're going to be outputting a letter grade. GradeOutput. And then we can delete the contents of the main method since this no longer applies. All right, so the first thing we want to do is define a score. And the CodeIt now activity doesn't specify if we need to accept a user input, so I'm not going to go through the trouble of doing that. Instead, I'm just going to define a static score. So int score equals, and the first value I guess we want to test out is maybe the last one. So make sure that the last else statement works properly. So let's just choose a low score like 25. Then we need our semicolon. Now let's just write out a comment explaining what's going to happen in the code below it, where we're going to have our if, else structured statements. So we want to write that we're going to print out the letter grade corresponding to the score on the test. Okay, so like I said earlier, we're going to do an if, else if, else if, else if, else. So we want 3 else ifs, and the first if and the last else. So let's just write that out first before we fill in the actual expressions that we need in the print statements. So if, else if, don't forget your curly braces. And then for the else if, we can actually copy it since, well, we need to do 2 more. So Control-V, Control-V. So now we have 3 else ifs. And lastly, of course, we need an else. Okay. So now that we've done this, we can start filling in our actual expressions and print statements. So for the first one, if score is greater than or equal to 90, because 90 itself is still, as you can see here, an A, then we want to print out. Let's make sure you don't forget to indent. System.out.println, and we just print out an A. Don't forget the semicolon. For the next one, we want to do the same kind of thing, score greater than or equal to, except now it needs to be greater than or equal to 80. And the reason we're not checking if score is less than 90 is because we already know that it's less than 90 if we reach this point in the code. Because as you can see here, the first if checked if it was greater than or equal to 90. And if that doesn't print something out, then that means we get to this next else if. So we already know that the score isn't greater than or equal to 90. So now all we need to check is the score greater than or equal to 80? And this is the same kind of pattern we're going to be following for the next few else ifs. So now we can do again system.out.println, print out a B, don't forget your semicolon. And again, like I said, same pattern, score greater than or equal to 70. And then we're going to do system.out.println for a C, we have a semicolon. Then we're going to do score greater than or equal to 60. Indent. We're going to print a D. And then for the very last one, since we know that the score isn't greater than 90, it's not greater than 80, it's not greater than 70, and it's not greater than 60, that means it has to be less than 60, which is what we want for F. So that's why we can just use an else instead of an else if. And indent, and we print out an F. There we go. And don't forget your semicolon. And that should be it. So now let's test out and make sure that with our current value of score of 25, that we get an F, which is what we would expect. Okay, so we save with Control S, we accept the defaults, hit enter, Control B to compile, and great, we compiled, there were no errors, and then we run with Control R. And yep, wow, that's sad, we got an F. Oh well. Let's see if we can change that and maybe get a B, since I feel like I've been doing pretty well with my coding. So now let's Control S, save, Control B to compile. Oh, whoops. I made a mistake. I put a B here instead of the actual number value. That's okay though, it's pretty easy to fix that. So let's just put an actual score that would correspond to the letter grade B, so 85, let's say, because that's between 80 and 89. So let's save. And before we compile again, just so you can see, even if you didn't immediately realize what I did wrong, Java is nice enough to tell us right here that it couldn't find a symbol, and then it points directly to what symbol it is it couldn't find, and it's this line right here, int score equals B. So it didn't understand what B was because we didn't define any variable called B. So it's pretty obvious from this that I need to put an actual integer value. So now let's compile again, Control B. Great, this time we get no errors, which is what we wanted, and then Control R. And we got a B, which is great. So we generally know our program is working well, but if you really want to go through and test every single value, obviously you would keep changing score to a different value each time to make sure that each print statement corresponding to a different letter grade prints out correctly.